Welcome everybody to the Dreambuildrs podcast. I am super excited for the upcoming interview. Now in this interview, we'll discuss how you can stop hiding, connect to your purpose, and play to your strengths as an introvert. And so if you are a working professional or a business owner, you might want to listen to this. And who better to ask these questions than the Introvert Advocate and the founder of Flourishing Introverts, Joanna Rawbone. Welcome on the podcast.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, so thank you.
Joanna, what I truly admire in you, and one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the podcast, is mainly because you are a woman that has a super clear purpose and you passionately carry out your message. And I find that super inspirational. So to start off this conversation, before we start talking about introverts, I would love you to share a little bit about your backstory and how that ultimately connects to your purpose.
Of course, yeah. So I've got, I suppose, a slightly unusual backstory in that I was an engineer at a time when women didn't do that kind of thing really. So in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And I always knew I was different, but I didn't know how or why I was different. I just knew I was different. And I noticed that everyone around me that was getting on, that was kind of getting promoted and people were raving about, had these big personalities and were really charismatic. And so I tried to emulate that. So I tried to be like them. So that was through the later stages of my engineering career. And when I moved into learning and development, and I've been in that field since 1987. So it's a real passion of mine. I do what I do because I have passion for it. But it was only, probably a decade ago now, that I thought this has to stop. This pretending to be something I'm not has to stop, because I wasn't being the fullest expression of myself. I wasn't bringing my whole self, and it felt fake. And authenticity is something that's really important to me as a value. So it just had to stop. So it was when, almost in that moment that I decided to stop, that things started to crystallize and coalesce around, now I know what I want to do. And what I wanted to do was to help people be more authentic, but in a particular niche that you've mentioned, which is around owning their introversion.
Beautiful, beautiful. And can you tell us a little bit more about your message in general? Because you touched upon it a little bit already, but I think it would be very nice to share what you actually do with introverts and your message, your whole message around them.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been in, as I say, training development, working with international clients since 1987. And one of the things I consistently noticed was that how many people, how many introverts are overlooked, are passed by for promotion, who do that pretending the same as I did. And I noticed that they weren't getting the opportunities that some of the extroverts were getting, even though sometimes their performance far outweighed, it far exceeded some of their more extroverted colleagues. But because they weren't pushing themselves forward, because they weren't bigging themselves up and being the big I am, they just wouldn't get noticed. And they were getting feedback much the same as I'd got feedback, which is you need to push yourself forward. You need to get out of your comfort zone. You need to speak up more. You need to join in with the banter more. All of which says, be more extroverted. So people like me, introverts in business, whether it's corporate and employed or whether it's their own business, there's this ongoing pressure to be something we're not. And the long-term impact of that is that many introverts feel not enough being who they are. So right at the heart of my work is enabling introverts to know that they're enough, that they can stop pretending. And when they stop pretending, what they need to do is really own their introvert strengths and be proud about it. So that's how I work with individuals, both in a one-to-one capacity, but also in group coaching sessions. But the bigger piece of work is probably that I'm working with organizations, and I call it cage rattling work, because what I want to do is I want to shake and rattle the cages a bit so that they start to understand that the extroversion bias is literally embedded in almost every practice and process in their business. I hope it's unconscious bias, but we really don't know. But where introverts are being overlooked, where they're not being valued for their natural strengths, where they're being pushed to be something they're not and ending up overwhelmed or in burnout because of it, organizations need to recognize that, especially those organizations who claim to have a strong diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda and policy. It's like, well, if you've got that, then you need to include this aspect of neurodiversity. So I'm working on those two parallel tracks with individual introverts to help them to really flourish, to come into their own, and with organizations to wake them up and level the playing field for us all.
That's beautiful. Now, I want to first of all ask the question, because we can talk about introverts on the workplace, and I want to shift to that later on. But what will be the main difference in your view between an extrovert and an introvert? How would you identify an introvert?
I go back to the original Jungian definition, and because that's my roots really. And Jung explained that introverts are already overstimulated mentally, so they don't need external stimulation in order for their mental batteries to be fully recharged and therefore enable them to do their best work. They need quiet time to recharge. They need alone time, or if they're with other people, something my husband and I kind of refer to quite a lot is we're in companionable silence. We'll go for a walk or go for dinner, and we may not say anything for quite a while. We're enjoying each other's company. We're enjoying where we are. We don't need to constantly be talking. Whereas extroverts are mentally recharged by social interaction, by change, by active experiences, by busyness. So if we think about the open plan office, it's exactly what extroverts need in order to kind of be hyped up and do what they need to do. And it's completely draining for the introverts. So what charges one drains the other. So there's the paradox of it. So that's the simple distinction. And also what we notice is that, and this is a quick way often to tell an introvert from an extrovert. I'm not much into guessing, but there is quite a good test here, which is that introverts have a think, say, think communication process. When you ask an introvert a question like me, what I'll want to do is I'll want to think through my answer, know what I want to say, and then communicate it. But in our fast-paced business life, we don't get to the say part of our process because things have moved on. Whereas you ask an extrovert a question, they have a say, think, say process. So they'll give you an answer, and then as they're answering, they'll think, is this really what I want to say? And they make sense of it as they go and may change it partway through. So an extrovert is not really attached to what they're saying, whereas an introvert has thought it through. By the time they say it, they mean it. So they're the batteries and the communication for me are the easy way to tell the introvert from the extrovert.
I totally resonate with what you just said, especially about things on the working floor, because I used to work for a corporate for almost for a decade. And I'm an introvert, so I've been sitting in meeting rooms with 20, 25 people for 1 hour, where only 3 people would perhaps speak up all the time, and the other 17 would remain silent. And so what are, in your view, some of the misconceptions that we have about introverts, especially when we think about how they can contribute as well to organizations, or whether we perceive them perhaps as shy or socially weird? What do you think about that?
Certainly there are many myths and misconceptions, and included in that are things like we don't have an opinion, we don't have a point of view. Because we don't jump in and voice everything all the time, we're perceived like we don't have a point of view. Nobody's noticed that if they leave space in the conversation, we might have a chance to express our point of view. Nobody notices that. But the other kind of complexity around introversion is that if it's already been said, many of us don't feel the need to repeat it or reinforce it. So we'll speak if we think we've got something of value to add. But if it's already been said by somebody else, that's enough. That's sufficient. We don't take airtime for the sake of taking airtime. So people think that we don't have an opinion, that we don't have a point of view, that we're bored, that we're disengaged, that we're arrogant, that we're shy, that we're, all sorts of things, none of which is true. Also, that we lack ambition because we're not constantly pushing forward. The perception is, well, they don't really want promotion. They haven't kind of asked for it. They haven't pushed themselves forward. Not true at all. It's just about how we communicate. We bring that quiet, calm presence, a quality of listening that many extroverts are frankly jealous of, because we tend to listen with our eyes as well as our ears. So we notice what's not being said. We notice the little body language signals that when someone says, yeah, that's fine, and we absolutely know it's not fine, because the head shake and the tone of voice, all of those things we pick up, which means that we're great at summarizing, we're great at assimilating ideas. What we're not necessarily good at is the spontaneous kind of, intervention with ideas. But in a meeting, if you tell me what it is we're discussing ahead of time, I can go away and do my research. I can have thought things through so that by the time we're in the meeting, I've got ideas and I'll find a way to get them included. But it's about people being aware of those communication differences and not making judgments about what quiet means.
Now, I think this is interesting, and it's crucial as well to make people more aware of introverts in the corporate working space. But how do you start changing that kind of shift if most of the culture is still based on what you said, speaking out and making decisions fast? And what are some of your ideas to start balancing that in a better way?
Yeah. It starts with awareness. So there has to be, and this isn't necessarily in order, but there has to be an education process. So if we take notice of that diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda, then if we're thinking about equity and inclusion, it means people are given the same opportunities, that we're not ruling out part of our workforce because of the way they are. So we need to educate around introversion and extraversion. I'm delighted to say it's starting to happen in schools. So that means by the time the next generation or so get into the workplace, it won't be such a big deal. But many managers have also been brought up that, the ones we favor, the ones we promote, are the ones we push forward. So my work with organizations starts with an audit. So I spend time in the organization looking at and working with and observing and just being in meetings and noticing where the bias is part of everyday practices and processes. That gives us then the opportunity to make some changes, to be aware of these are the things. So then it's about producing a report saying this is where the bias exists. These are some of the recommendations that typically include some training and some awareness. And then it's about what do we do to hold the gains, because quite often this is a cultural change, this is a behavioral change. And when we're looking at a cultural change like this, it takes a long time to really stick, to embed. So we need to make sure that people don't just slip back into the old ways of being. And it is about an education process. And if we look at the number of brilliant introverted leaders in the world and around us, we get to realize that the world doesn't have to be, and business doesn't have to be run by extroverts. Some of the best tech companies, Bill Gates, introvert; Steve Jobs, introvert; Warren Buffett, introvert; Barack Obama, introvert. The list goes on. Brené Brown, who for me is one of the best thought leaders around at the moment, introvert. We are everywhere, and let's stop pretending to be something we're not. Let's step in and claim that space, that quiet leadership space, but that is quiet, but no less powerful for it.
Absolutely. And I want to jump immediately into that individual space that you were just talking about all this leadership, that introverts can also be great leaders. But before that, if you look at your practice, you've been working with many introverts over your lifetime, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the most common things that you see around you, why introverts are not living out what truly matters to them? Like, what's holding them back?
Yeah. What's holding them back typically is years or decades of being told to be different. And over time, that develops most of us have an inner critic, but it develops a particularly strong inner critic for many introverts who always have that nagging in the back of their mind about, you can't do this because you're an introvert. You can only do that if you speak up, if you step up. So one of the things I do in some of the group programs is I enable people to meet their inner critic. And it's a beautiful piece of work, actually, because you get to understand who and what your inner critic is and what they're afraid of. Inner critic's message is to keep us safe. So if your inner critic is saying, you can't do that, that's too scary, people like you don't take leadership or management roles, it's about understanding what's the inner critic trying to keep you safe from, what's it protecting you from. And once you understand that, you can then be more discerning about which messages you take on from your inner critic and which you say, thanks, but we're fine here. We can't just dismiss an inner critic. It's part of our sub-personalities. We all have one. It's just that some of us, it's louder than others and more persistent than others. And what we then do is enable people to meet their inner advocate, who offers a great balance to the inner critic. So the inner advocate is the one who goes, you can do that. Look at them. If they can do it, you can do it. And it really is our cheerleader in that respect. So it's often a really powerful inner critic that holds us back, plus those, many years of being told you're not good enough and not having enough role models. So even where we do have, good, powerful, introverted leaders, many of them wouldn't say, I'm an introvert. I mean, if you went into an organization and said, hands up all the introverts, nobody would put their hand up because it's deemed as, there's something wrong with you. We're broken. We need fixing. Not at all. So many of us don't have the confidence yet to go, I'm an introvert and I love it and I'm proud of it and it doesn't stop me in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And that brings me also to like being your complete and your authentic self, because that's basically embracing yourself.
Yeah.
Now, can you perhaps tell us how you found your authentic self as an introvert? I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it's taken me a while because I've known that I'm an introvert since my 30s when I first did the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And a lot of people say it's rubbish, it's not, it's not a robust instrument. But for me, it's still the most pivotal moment I had in my developing career that had me go, oh, now I know why I'm different. So what I was taught, because I then went on to train to be a Myers-Briggs type practitioner, is that your type is not an excuse for your behavior. So for me, that really started to help me understand that, yes, I'm an introvert and I can behave any way I want. I can use extroverted behaviors if I need to, if I choose to, and if I'm suitably recharged, that it's not going to wipe me out. So part of finding my really authentic introvert type is to really distill it down into, so who am I as an introvert? What are my strengths? What are the things that I can only do if I'm naturally kind of and fully recharged? What are the things that I will never do? Many introverts talk about they hate talking on the phone. I don't. I actually enjoy talking on the phone. So again, you can't put us in one bucket and say all introverts hate that. So it really is about, and I noticed behind you, you've got the Ikigai thing. And I'm a big fan of using the westernized version of Ikigai, where what we start to do is say, what is it I'm good at? What is it that I love doing? And that combination, of course, is my strengths. What is it that I can get paid for? And what is it that the world needs? And at the heart of that, as you know, is your Ikigai. That's my purpose. Once I use that model to understand that combination of what I'm good at and what I love doing, then start to figure out how I can use it. That's how I got to my purpose. And if you think about most people in organizations, when the boss gives you a performance review and they tell you what you're good at, we've been talking about that as though they're our strengths. They're not our strengths. Our strengths are that combination of what we're good at and love doing, because a strength is something that strengthens me, that brings me joy, that lights me up. And there are lots of things that I'm really good at and that I really don't enjoy doing. So they're just a competence, they're not a strength.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you also work with Ikigai, because that's also one of the things that I love to work with. I think it's an absolute brilliant tool to get much more understanding about who you are, what you basically said. Now, if you are an introvert, how can you, if you understand your purpose and you understand what your talents are, how can you then go from hiding to, let's say, start bringing something on the table and really start showing your authentic self?
Yeah. So I'm not a fan of getting out of my comfort zone. And I know there are lots of people who say the only growth is outside your comfort zone. I happen not to believe that, because I've worked with too many introverts who find that when they get too far out of their comfort zone, they get scared and retreat right back into the heart, into the depth of their comfort zone. And it's really hard to get them out there again. So the principle I adopt is about working at the outer edge of our comfort zone, so that what we're doing is continually expanding and growing that comfort zone. So when in my group programs, one of the things we do is we map what's inside the comfort zone, what's just outside, and what's way out there. And then what we start to do is we start to put in place action plans that enable people to almost have one foot in, one foot out, so that we're just starting to build our, our capabilities just outside. And all of that, of course, is going to require that I'm fully recharged, that I'm mentally and physically and emotionally ready to do this. Because for me, kind of pushing people out is like throwing people in the deep end of the pool. And I still think that's cruel. It works for some people, but that's not the way I choose to work. So for me, it's about always at that outer edge and just expanding, expanding, expanding. And that's how I've grown in the 30 or so years that I've been working around learning and development. I also happen to be a big fan of, if you've got any cycling fans here, of David Brailsford's marginal gain technology. And what he believed in, and what got the cycling team so much success, is that they looked at the small things. What are the small things that make a difference, that cumulatively add up to make a big difference? So for me, transformation doesn't have to be earth-shattering. Transformation is that series of little changes that over time haven't felt too painful, that have made a big difference, so that when you do look back over your journey, you kind of go, wow, look how far I've come.
I love that. That's brilliant. Now, Joanna, I want to ask one more final question, and this is related to entrepreneurs and business owners.
Yes.
I'm thinking, like, if you're just starting out and you're setting up your company, or you're starting out as a freelancer, most of us need to be out there on social media. And to the introverts that I know that I'm talking to, sometimes find that quite difficult to find their voice there. Because it's a fast-paced world, and you need to speak up, and you need to deliver content constantly on an ongoing basis and being consistent. What is your view on that? To do that sustainable also in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's the key bit that you added there, that sustainable bit, because it's very easy for us to go all guns blazing and follow some of the big masters that we see at this stuff, only to realize kind of 6 days in that we just can't keep it up. So for me, it's about really understanding and again, going back to my strengths, playing to my strengths, using whatever social media tools work for me. It took me a long time to do a Facebook Live. I've emceed events of over 1,000 people. I've spoken at conferences of over 1,000 people. And yet showing up and doing a Facebook Live was probably, other than my TEDx talk, the most nerve-wracking thing I've done. Because at conferences, unless it's recorded, once you've said it, it's gone. It's kind of disappeared. Whereas Facebook Lives and things like that stay around forever. And I was taught a really brilliant trick, which was Once I understand who my ideal client is, and I'm lucky in that my ideal clients happen to be fellow introverts. So it's easy for me because I don't have to be all rah, 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 and shouty and kind of, I can be my natural, measured, calm, but, excitable self. And I imagine, because I do have a really clear ideal client, avatar, if you like, that person is just the other side of that camera. And I'm talking to that one person. I'm not talking to a whole load of other people. And most introverts are good on a one-to-one basis. So when I go networking, unlike, dare I say, unlike some extroverts who, when they're talking to you, are constantly kind of looking over your shoulder to see who else might be interesting for them to talk to, I focus all of my attention on that one person. I have a number of questions that I know can take the kind of attention off me and onto them. And most other people seem to like talking about themselves, so that works. And I know how to get people to that point where they say, I'd really like to know more about that, because that's the purpose of any networking event. It's not to close a deal or anything. It's just to get people to say, let's go for a coffee or let's meet again. So for me, it's about choosing the form of social media where your clients are. So I'm on LinkedIn a lot because that's where my clients are. And if, I have got a Facebook group, but I show up as an introvert on that Facebook group. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. There's enough clients for us all. So don't attract the people who are not going to resonate with you. Show up as yourself, and then you'll attract your kind of people.
Amazing. I think that information was really, really valuable. Now, I would love to round up this conversation, but before we go, I would like to ask you if you have one last final message. If you have one last final message to give this audience, what would you say?
Yeah, so I have a mantra, and it developed a little while ago when I was prepping for my TEDx talk, actually. And the mantra that I now live by, well, there's two actually. I'm going to cheat and give you two bits. But my mantra is purpose plus passion trumps fear. So when you get clear on your purpose, and it gives me goose pimples when I talk about it still. When you get clear on your purpose, when you've got that passion, and for me, it's about making a difference. I'm doing this because I want to make a difference to people's lives. That means that whatever I was afraid of just melts away because my purpose is clear and I have a passion. I'm going to stick at this until I make a difference and beyond. But my other one, and I think this is especially important for new entrepreneurs, new business owners, is done is better than perfect. And as a recovering perfectionist, it took me some time to get there. But, get stuff out there. If you wait, you'll procrastinate and then you'll miss the boat. Somebody else will do what you wanted to do. Done is better than perfect. So those two things are my best bits of advice.
Joanna, thank you so much for this inspirational conversation and all the value that you brought into this conversation. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
Before everyone goes, where can we find you? And I know you also have an awesome freebie to give. So tell a bit more about that.
Yes. So if you go to my website, has just about everything on it. So all the W's, flourishingintroverts.com is where you'll find my podcast, where you'll find my TEDx talk, where you'll find my musings, where you'll see notification of any programs I'm running. But I put together a freebie especially for this, which is about really finding your strengths and playing to your strengths as an introvert. And it's just a neat little freebie that gets people thinking about the 3 key secrets that get you there. And I think you're going to put that link in the comments box. So my website for pretty much everything else, including the quiz. So I have a quiz which enables you to find out what type of introvert you are, because we're not all the same. So yourintroverttype.co.uk is the quiz that will help you figure out what type of introvert you are. And that's on my website too. So pretty much everything is in that one-stop shop.
That's amazing, guys. I totally encourage you to check it out, especially when you're an introvert. Do the quiz, check what type of introvert you are, and then also go to that link. I will drop it in the comments below and find out your free guide with 3 secrets so that you can find out what your true strengths are and live more authentically. Joanna, thank you so much for this conversation.
You're welcome.
And I'm looking forward to see your work, and I'm going to follow you in the future. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you.